topic number one, why does anyone need to structure their wealth?
It's a very open question.
It is.
Do you think it depends on the amount of that wealth, or do you think anyone with what number is wealth to you? What are you defining as wealth?
No, but I think the type of structuring is driven by the number.
Yeah,
so, for example, it doesn't matter if you've got $1, you need to structure your wealth. That's
Yeah.
probably just in a current account with the bank.
Yeah.
If you've got $100 million, you need to structure your wealth, but it's obviously a very different, very complex, much more robust structuring that needs to take place. So anybody and everybody should structure their wealth. It's just
how that's
how
structured.
do you do it and what is the best way, which is driven by that number, the complexities that everyone's got money problems. It's just different types of problems exist at different levels of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk, maybe we can work, start small quickly and then move our way up, because obviously the smaller it is, as we said, the more simple the solution. So we can talk about that quite quickly. And then, so let's talk about that kind of, I say naught, but the naught to 100, 250K maybe dollars, and then we'll look at, what are some with 250 to $1 million, look at $1 million to 10 and then maybe 10 plus, like that. Let's maybe structure it like that. So I guess, like you said, if you're an individual with, 1 to 100 grand, dollars, you should be looking at a very simple solution of running those assets through a basic kind of, like you say, account. Although being the crypto guy in the room, I'd be arguing that you don't want your money with the banks. You want to hold it in somewhere more self-custodial. But yeah, you want to be able to make sure that you've got easy access to that money. You can draw down on it whenever you want. You can spend it easily.
Yeah.
It's not tied up. It's not behind, any kind of, you've got to request the money to be drawn down out of one account so you can spend it in another. It's just there available to go. So that's the first.
For sure. Low cost is highest priority.
Yeah.
Low cost, access and flexibility.
Yeah. And speed.
Because you don't have the choice or even the option to go and put your money in a segregated account somewhere out of reach, because if your car breaks down, someone burgles your house, there's an emergency and you need to catch a flight. If you've only got 100 grand, you're going to be dipping into a significant portion of that. So efficient placement of capital, whether it's cash or investment in a bank account, efficient in terms of accessibility, liquidity, and low cost is your absolute priority at those lower levels, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
And the other reason for that is tax isn't really that much of a concern. Yes, tax is a cost if you're in a taxable jurisdiction, but on 100 grand, if you make 10% rate of return, 10 grand capital gains tax, it's not the biggest problem in the world. If you've invested 100 million and then you get hit with a capital gains tax problem, there's a serious problem that, it's something that you should address and can minimize significantly.
Absolutely. Okay, so then we move on to let's say the next tier, 100 to 500K, let's say.
Yeah.
Where would you sit on that?
I mirror a lot of the first 100K, just because, again, the costs associated with your more complex and comprehensive wealth planning vehicles are not justified by the little capital that you have to invest. So I think cost is still a significant priority. It is maybe at that point a little bit more about the being more selective in terms of the placement of that capital. How are those assets allocated? Going back to my investment point of view, or my investment example, 10% rate of return on 100 grand might not make or break your year financially, but a 10% rate of return on $500,000, all of a sudden that's 50 grand. That's an annual wage to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think the other point to that is, looking at some of these current accounts now, especially the digital ones, they're offering half decent, sometimes 3-4%, just cash, direct, liquid, there and then, interest on your cash, right? So taking that versus nothing.
Yes.
When we're starting to now bridge between needing it immediately to starting to look at investment products and where we can get to. So I think I agree with you. And then we get to that 500K point. Now I think is at the point where we would start then thinking about how do we start investing this money. Then we hit $500,000 to, let's call it 1.5, 2 mil.
Yeah. And another thing I think a lot of people at those lower levels of wealth miss is that in terms of marginal gains, so what actions and activities can we take to have the greatest impact on our net worth, whether it's tax saving, as we've discussed, saving, investment, and optimization? What's the small thing we can do that has the greatest impact? At those lower levels of wealth, the greatest impact we can have on our net worth is to actually spend less and save more.
Yeah.
I.e., if you don't buy a coffee every day for a year, you're probably going to save 10 grand.
In my case, it's a significant amount.
Well, there you go, 25 grand. So like 25 grand is much greater return on it. Saving 25 grand is a much greater return on investment than going and sticking $10,000 in the stock market, for example, So a lot, like so many people miss out. They're like, what's the point of investing? I've only got 5 grand. It's, well, you should invest, but actually like investing isn't going to get you to those next levels or echelons of wealth. The greatest marginal gains come from the smaller actions you can take outside of just looking at capital. It's more about budgeting and spending money.
That's actually a really, really good point as well. And I don't think a lot of people, we talk about wealth planning, and actually some of that wealth planning is, I say wealth preservation, but what I mean by that is not spending as much.
Yeah.
You're going to have more money in your pocket if you don't spend as much of it.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really interesting point. Okay. So then I think we need to jump into the next.
Yes.
We're starting to get a bit more
complexities.
Yeah. We're starting to get a bit more serious now. So we're looking at, $500,000, probably more like 750, but that sort of level through to kind of $2-3 million of investable capital.
Yeah.
Where do you sit there?
Very nuanced. And this is when you really need to, and we're talking about the whole conversation so far has been costs being justified.
Yeah.
This is when getting it right and getting it wrong can make a massive impact. And yeah, there's general rules of thumb, like at those sorts of levels, maybe don't hold your wealth in your own, in your personal name, hold in a trust foundation, a holding company, move it offshore potentially. So there's extra levels of flexibility and protection shielding the capital. But the difference between getting it right and getting it wrong can be incredibly costly. So that's where I say, and now the cost of hiring a professional advisor, a professional accountant, a professional tax planner is much more justified because the value that they can add for their fee at that level is significantly greater than, for example, paying someone 5 grand for a piece of tax planning advice when you've only got 50 grand in the bank account.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the other thing, I actually heard this the other day, was around at that sort of level, you start to need to think, you need to diversify your money in not just one account, maybe not even 2 accounts, maybe 3 accounts, right? Because then you spread in the risk, we talked about. But the other side to that is spreading it across jurisdictions as well. So maybe you hold some of that capital in the UK, you hold some of that capital in, I don't know, Switzerland, you hold some of that capital in the UAE, for example. So then all of a sudden now you're not just diversifying the third party risk in terms of the bank or the financial institution you're using, you're also diversifying the location risk as well. So now we're looking at, if the UK, which is already going down a real shithole of a place type thing, then you're now looking at, say, Switzerland as a much safer place to hold your capital. So I think that's another thing I thought was really interesting that I heard the other day.
And it's becoming more and more relevant. And it's also a reason people are leaning more and more into the crypto. But every day there's headlines of, and dealing with clients day in, day out. Speaking to a client this morning, can't transfer their money from whatever reason from Ireland to their UAE account, or even their HSBC expat account, which is based in Jersey. It's like the biggest bank in the world. It's like they can't move their money because the bank is asking too many questions. So as regulation, as the developed world, but the world in general, keeps going more and more in this direction, I actually think people such as ourselves are becoming, not even necessarily just from an advisory point of view, but just purely from an access to institutions, jurisdictions point of view, we're becoming an essential part of anybody's wealth management, regardless of level, because if you have your money in one institution, in one jurisdiction, and then the regulator decides they don't like you, you're going to have a serious problem on your hands.
I think the other thing is, I was just thinking, I read an article this morning, a Bloomberg piece around Venezuela and stablecoins, because their currency has been devalued so much over the years. They are one of the nations that have turned very heavily to stablecoins. And now the question is, will that stabilize a little bit? And therefore, will they shift back to Venezuelan pesos or whatever it is?
Yeah.
And the question is
US dollars now. I think.
Yeah, well, I guess, I guess that would be the question, right? Is how that develops. The point I'm trying to make there is, and we do a lot of business in South Africa. Obviously, you've got ties to South Africa as well. So, places like that, and their currencies are very volatile.
Yeah.
One of our private wealth clients we manage here, one of his portfolio assets is a hotel in South Africa. And he wants to look at extracting surplus capital from that entity into another entity, whether that be a Jersey holdco, whether that be a Switzerland holdco, whether that be a UAE foundation, because you want to make sure you've got some cash there for it's a hotel, right? We need to make sure we've got operational cash. If a toilet breaks and we need to get something in, or a building falls down, we've got to be able to fix it, right? But also not leaving more capital than you need in certain places where there's really high volatility on currency. And I think as British people specifically, I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah.
Because our currency is very stable in the grand scheme of things. We forget that actually sometimes you don't want to hold that native currency. And, US would be the same, UK, even some Europeans, although the euro is a bit questionable these days. But so I think that's also important, is diversifying the currency you're holding as well
100%. Absolutely. And that's a good example of how, as you go through the different levels of wealth, your problems change.
Yeah.
And if you're just in the UK and you've got 100 grand in savings, it's not a concern at all.
Especially if all your costs are also UK.
Sterling based. And it's no problem. But
if you've got an international business or an international lifestyle, you need to make sure that you've got these.
Yeah, you do. Which is where you need the offshore multi-currency account to just manage the basic necessities of, before we even get into the complexities of wealth planning.
Yeah, and I think a future video is definitely going to be on maybe the kind of top 5 offshore banking solutions that we would recommend and things like that.
Yeah.